Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing another playing with pairs, and I have my palette cleanser pairings. So these are decks that really evoke that energy of clean slate or a palette cleansing between practices. So we're going to start things off today with my original palette cleansers, the Dreaming Way Tarot. I'm going to be pairing the Hedgewitch Botanical. So I absolutely love these two decks together. The Dreaming Way Tarot, my copy is trimmed, so normally it has white borders all the way around, but taking those borders off really allows, I think, the deck to really integrate and have a conversation with the Hedgewitch Botanical in the middle, even though there is a lot of white space around this particular illustration. It creates a really beautiful conversation that definitely feels like we're leaving a lot of room, a lot of breathing room, a lot of space and stillness within these two decks. So here we have Sacred with the King of Swords and the Eight of Cups. This type of a pairing really encourages me to focus in on the Oracle deck as a key word and allows it to really expand and create a lot of intention and space around the tarot deck. So where the tarot deck isn't secondary to the Oracle, it definitely becomes more of a focal point in this sense because my eye is naturally drawn to it. And the other thing that I really love about working with these two decks together is the Hedgewitch Botanical is a very minimalistic colored deck. So not only do we have all that beautiful white space, which I love to create breathing room in a reading, it also has just some minute pops of color. And those colors that show up in this Oracle card will be the colors that I tend to be drawn to in the tarot deck. And so that allows me to really dive deeper into what those particular elements in the card have to say to me. So it just gives a really interesting layer that allows me to really take my time with the messages. For me, a lot of the palette cleansing decks and energies that we're going to see today are also decks that encourage me to slow down. So a palette cleansing for me is not only kind of taking a break, wiping the slate clean in between practices or in between years or seasonal shifts, but it's also a really great time for me to take some time, have a little bit of patience and slowness with my practice. And these decks also kind of serve that purpose as well. So here we have Brighton with the Queen of Wands and the King of Cups. I love that. That's a beautiful combination. I just think these two work really, really well together. We do get a lot of that sense of time and place within this deck, within the Dreaming Way as well. I feel like this deck really does a great job of kind of giving an indication to the time and place energy. So if we're looking at the Golden Poppy with Dream, and we're looking at this Nine of Wands over here and this Page of Wands, both of these cards give me the idea of like waiting. We need to take some time. We need to have a little bit of patience here, and maybe this creation of our dreams or bringing our dreams into fulfillment. There's some time that needs to be taken here. Even though this is a Page of Wands, she feels like she's very slow moving. She's being very deliberate. Here in this Nine of Wands, maybe she's a little tired, right? She's a little bit overwhelmed. She needs to take a break in this pursuit of her dreams, and she needs to kind of be a little bit more intentional, a little bit more mindful like we see in the Page of Wands. And again, for me, that's really talking about timing, really talking about how energy is moving within a reading. And as far as creating a palette cleanser, right? If I'm moving between practices, if I'm moving between energies or seasonal shift or things of that nature, timing can be a key component to that because it can tell us whether that's going to be a slow shift or a quick shift, or whether that palette cleanse is going to be something that we need to do over maybe a few days to a few weeks versus maybe just a day or even a few hours. So I really love the way that these two decks work together in that sense as well. It gives me not only that kind of clean slate, stepping away from the esoterica, stepping away from maybe those deeper practices where we are looking at using decks to go into like work with particular energies such as deity or fae or really deep personal growth work where we're looking at maybe shadow work or inner child work. These types of decks that we're going to look at today really all in their own way kind of create a little bit of a palette cleanse in between those practices for me. And I think they work really well in that sense. So in our next few pairings, we're going to look at different ways that we can kind of integrate this palette cleanser energy into various practices or personal growth type of work. So here I have a pairing that I like to use for a sort of palette cleanser when emotional energies get really high. And here I have the Rosebud Tarot and the Winterseeer Animal Oracle. So here in this particular pairing, I like to use these two decks together, and I will say this is a fairly new pairing for me because both of these are fairly new decks in my collection towards the middle to end of last year. And so while this is something fairly new, I've found that it's been working really well for when I need to kind of cleanse the palette, create that clean slate energy when emotional energies have gotten really, really high or really out of sorts in some sort of way. So the Rosebud Tarot, I think, really creates a beautiful supportive energy on the table, and it is a deck that I would consider fairly nurturing. It's a little bit more soft-spoken, so if you're looking at, dynamic emotional energies, it's a great one for tapping into that, kind of taking it down a notch. And I think it works really well for kind of like just cleansing the palette because it is soft, it is gentle, it's going to take it easy on you as you're, working through your emotional energies, but it doesn't bring a whole lot of dynamic emotional energy on its own. It's pretty neutral in that sense, and it really creates a beautiful sort of clean slate palette cleanser of the heart. Now the Winterseeer I like to include in this pairing because it gives me not only that beautiful animal energy to tap into, and we've got some really great keywords, again similar to the Hedgewitch Botanical, which of course this is another deck by that same creator. There's a lot of white space. So I feel like there's a lot of breathing room in this energy. So we can take these kind of focal point energies or emotions that we're experiencing. And this tells me a little bit about how to kind of tone that down a little bit, how to kind of let it ease a little. So again, we're looking at that sort of palette cleanser, that clean slate energy within the heart space, which is how I work with these decks. So if we have the Raven here with Death, and maybe that Death card is what is tapping into the emotional state that's happening currently, then I can look to the Rosebud Tarot to kind of look at, what do I need to do with this energy? How do I kind of calm it down a little bit? How do I bring it back down into a place that I can do something productive with it? And I think this particular pairing works really well for that. I love the animals in this deck because while I'm not well versed in animal energy, I do feel that it's pretty accessible animal energy. The guidebook is also really wonderful, but you don't need to connect with the guidebook if you don't want to. I can definitely get a sense of the energy of this card by just looking at the artwork. Color again plays a key component in these sort of pairings for me, particularly when we're looking at decks that have a lot of white space, because again, that's like, it makes the color really stand out. And so I think that works really well for kind of tapping into what the emotional landscape is right now. And it's really interesting seeing it through the lens of the animals. And then kind of how can I tone that down a little bit, right? How can I get control of that emotional energy that's maybe spinning a little bit outward at the moment? And I just feel like this little pairing here really creates a wonderful sort of palette cleanser for the heart space. So whereas we kind of talked about the overall sort of palette cleanser energy with the Dreaming Way, that for me is just a really great all-purpose sort of palette cleanser. It's one I use a lot in between various practices. This for me speaks really significantly to the heart space. And sometimes when the heart gets really, really full or really, really heavy, this can be a wonderful way to kind of give it a little bit of a break, to kind of just release that energy a little bit, bring it back down. Like I said, the Rosebud Tarot I do find to be a quite gentle, loving, and nurturing kind of a deck. In a very soft and understated way. So it doesn't bring a lot of charged emotional energy to it. It's very soft, it's very quiet. And in that sense, I think it works beautifully with that little bit of animal energy that we get through the Winterseeer, where we kind of have the animals sort of embodying our heart space at the moment. So like with whale in depth, that would be where my heart space currently is. And maybe I'm feeling a bit like I'm into the deep. Maybe I'm feeling a bit like I need to resurface. I need to take that breath. So I can look to the 10 of earth and the hang up or the hanged person here and look at, kind of where maybe experiencing that, or what can I tap into to kind of help me engage and get out of the space that I'm currently in. So I think it works really beautifully in that sense. And I just find it to be a really loving, supportive kind of a energy, but again, it's not an overwhelming sort of sugary sweet kind of a hug deck type of an energy. It doesn't shy away from those harder aspects of life either. It does tell us what we need to know, but it does so in a way that allows our heart to kind of just take a beat, take a moment, and not feel like we're just so overly engaged in whatever emotional state is going on here that we can't see any way forward from that. So I find this to be a really great one for dealing with those heart-centered situations. So keeping with white space decks by that same creator, we have the Linestrider tarot here, which is a beautiful, again, white space tarot deck. And I'm going to be pairing that with the Earth Alchemy Oracle. Is a pairing that speaks really significantly into that clean slate, palette cleanser energy when it comes to the body, the physical, the material realm. Again, the colors are just fantastic across these particular decks and these cards. I find they work really, really well together. What I like about this particular pairing for sort of that clean slate energy is that we do have a plant and a crystal in the Earth Alchemy Oracle. So that gives us something like very foundational. And the crystal for me kind of represents the foundational energy, and the plant represents the potential for growth. And we can see that message reflected in the tarot deck. So I feel like it works really well. We're looking at here this idea of cleanse through this particular crystal and plant. It's about lifestyle choices, detox, and nourishment. And how do we do that? How do we step into that energy? We look at the Six of Wands and the Fool. So I think it works really beautifully for kind of creating that clean slate sort of energy in the material world, specifically with body. So although I don't really do a ton of like health related stuff, I find that this does really work well for kind of just looking at like my overall well-being in terms of my physical self. So what do I need to do here with this crystal and plant? I need to restructure, and I can do that through identifying, reframing, and enhancing. And I can look to the tarot deck here to tell me how to do that. This with its 3 keywords also works really well for my keyword spread that I do, where I will, pull one card, and whether it has 2 or 3 keywords, I'll pull a related tarot card for each of those. Again, I did a whole video on that, and today we're just really talking about the pairing itself. I really like that balance between that really full kind of beautifully illustrated imagery that we have coming through the Earth Alchemy, and again, that really simple, and I don't mean simple in a bad way, like it's a really good thing, that very minimalistic depiction and illustration coming through the Linestrider, because it gives us something very succinct to hone in on, I think. And they do work really well together in terms of like color readings and, looking at where the color is repeating. We can see here that we have this golden topaz and yellow rose. So kind of that gold and yellow color, which we see very clearly represented here in this Queen of Wands. And then over here we have the Eight of Cups, where we don't really see that. We kind of have this blue color here, which kind of mimics the color in the butterflies. So for me, this would be telling me like, where can I raise my vibration and step into that sort of abundance energy within my physical self or within my mundane material everyday life. I've got this Eight of Cups over here that I'm relating to these butterflies, and that's really about like letting it go, letting it transform, letting it leave. This figure is also walking away, right? He's leaving this reading behind, and we see this Queen of Wands is kind of mimicking the color going on in this card. So this would tell me this is where I need to be focusing that energy, and I need to let go of those things that are holding me back from doing it. It's a Suit of Cups, so maybe that's some emotional energy that I need to be letting go of so I can step into that really wonderful Queen of Wands energy. And I just think they're beautiful together. I really like the a very sort of concrete, earthy energy that comes through the earth alchemy. And I think that is part of that, that idea of the foundational, that root, that sort of rock energy that we get through the crystal, and then that growth, that blooming through the plants. There's also definitely a sense of kind of time and space, I think, here within this particular oracle deck as well, because we have the crystals, which are like more permanent, right? They're very slow to change. It's very long term, whereas a plant can bloom and grow in a very short amount of time. So we're also kind of looking at timing here, that balance between the long-term things that we want to cultivate in our sort of body work or body practice, in our sense of physical self, and the short-term sort of growth work that we do to kind of help us get there one step at a time. I just think it works really beautifully. Again, it's kind of that deck that doesn't bring a lot of sort of emotional energy or anything to that reading. I feel like it does do a really good job of staying very neutral for the most part. But again, it also, for me, because of the crystals and the flowers and the plants and animals that we also see in the Linestrider, I feel like it works really well for kind of creating that clean slate, palette cleanser energy in the physical world. So just as I have other decks that we've looked at for that clean slate, that palette cleanser energy for like heart and for the body, I also have one that I've been working with for the mind. Now this is a fairly new sort of pairing and fairly new decks in my collection. So these are new practices that I'm working with, but I'm finding that the Fountain Tarot paired with the White Owl Mystic Oracle is phenomenal for mind space cleansing. So these two decks together have kind of been blowing my mind a little bit, which is funny because I'm using them as a way to kind of disconnect from some of the other energies and really focus on getting clear with what's going on in my head. So I often joke that and I know a lot of us do, that mind is like, a computer with like 500 browser tabs open, right? That's what it feels like on a daily basis. And what this pairing is doing for me so far this month is allowing me to kind of strip all of that away and just get focused on like, what's the real thought going on underneath all of that. So it's so funny because the Fountain Tarot is a deck that's come and gone from my collection, and the first time I had it, I did not connect with it. I even showed it in a video where I was like, this deck is cold, it doesn't talk to me, it doesn't speak to me, and I think that's because I was trying to use it in a way that doesn't really work for the energy of this deck and the way that it wants to work with me. Yes, I do, personify my decks, but that's just how I make the connection to them. So I found that in trying to force it into a particular box, it wasn't working for me. When I let it kind of just be what it wanted to be, it really started to click. And for me, that is connecting with the mind space. It's connecting with thought process and getting past all of the emotional undercurrents and all of the layers that we put on top of thoughts and feelings, ego, that kind of stuff, shadow, or whatever you happen to bring into it. This kind of strips all of that away for me, and it just gets really, really clear about what do I think? Like, what do I really think, right? Beyond all of that. Now, the thing with the White Owl Mystic is sometimes the keywords, because it does tap into like moons and, as you see here, astrological associations, sometimes I struggle a little bit with how that works for me. And so I'll lean into it a little bit more intuitively, which is kind of cool because it's like this blend of the mind, but also the intuitive mind. So what the higher self knows and what the conscious self is aware of. And I think this particular pairing works really cool for that. And I really love the way that they kind of bring about those two things into balance for me. And so it's been a really interesting pairing, and one that I've definitely used like when my mind gets super cluttered and when I'm feeling like I cannot make heads or tails of my own thoughts. I have been coming to this particular pairing. I've also been using it for some planning and things like that to kind of just strip all of that away and figure out like what's really going on, the thought process underneath it all. So here's a good example, like March moon, but we also see like some hosiery with some torn, ragged edges here. We have this sort of pink moon, we have the bird, we have the flowers, and I can sort of tie all that together in, and what do each of those those things mean to me, what kind of a thought is underneath all of that, combining that together. And then I can look to the tarot deck to help me understand that message. So in this case, the tarot actually does help clarify the oracle deck rather than the other way around, which is kind of funny, because sometimes I struggle with the associations. Now, there is a little guidebook with this deck, so I can look this up, and this does definitely help. So August moon, we have a time to harvest the growth of old projects and enjoy their vitality. That's a great little succinct message for me to tie into. But if I don't want to get into the guidebook, if I want to work with this a little bit more intuitively, like I said, that sort of super conscious or higher self working in conjunction with the conscious mind, with awareness of what I know in the moment versus what my higher self knows. Like, it really encourages me to bring those two things together in a really beautiful way. So we looked at a pairing with that clean slate energy, that palette cleanser for the heart and the mind. So now we're going to take a look at one that I use for kind of that soul or spiritual work. And I have the White Sage Tarot in a tin and the Kuan Pocket Oracle. Now, I know that I have shown this pairing before. It's definitely a pairing that I find to be nurturing and supportive, but it also does a really beautiful job of kind of creating this clean slate energy between deep spiritual work for me. So I like to pair these two together to kind of take a moment, take a breath in between when I'm doing deep work with specific deity. Now, that might seem like a funny thing to say because I'm using a deity deck here with the Kuan Yin, right? However, I feel like the energy of Kuan Yin actually really lends itself well to this practice. She's definitely a soft, quiet, compassionate, heart-centered type of an energy for me. But there's also a lot of depth and soul there that I think does a really good job of kind of rebalancing. And that's kind of what I look at for this particular pairing. When I've been doing that deep work with deity, I have a practice that I do with the Dark Mother around the dark new moon, and then a practice that I do with Mother Mary around the full moon. Now, both of those practices are very charged with personal association, emotional energies, deep spiritual work, and they're very high vibration kind of work in that way. And I like to use this little pairing in between because it creates that kind of breathing room, that clean slate energy to help me shift from the dynamic work of working with one aspect of the goddess to another. Again, I'm still working with an aspect of the goddess. So for me, that definitely does relate into spiritual work. And I feel like these two together, like they're really beautiful, and they do help me kind of take a step back and transition. So again, palette cleanser, right? I'm shifting gears from one deep work to another type of deep work, and I'm using this as that transition in between. I've talked about transition decks before and how I do a lot of transition readings to help me move from one kind of state of being or state of mind to another. And this is just a great example of that. This is just a palette cleanser or transition reading that I do between spiritual work. And I do find that the kind of more pip style, minimalist nature of the White Sage Tarot works really well for kind of just creating a clean slate. And I do really like the imagery on the Kuan Yin, but of course this little pocket one also has the messages on the back. So I do tend to look at those as well, where I'm looking at, what kind of energy will help me shift from one dynamic work to the other. And I think this little deck combo works really well for that. It's also, again, similar to like the Rosebud and the Winterseeer. Like, I do find it to be a fairly nurturing deck. And for me, when I'm shifting from that really deep work, that deep spiritual work, a little bit of a hug is helpful for me. It kind of just reaffirms my connection to spirit, to deity, kind of lets me know that, like, even as I shift from different practices and I go through different processes, like, it just kind of tells me that deity is still there supporting me through this work, even as I shift from one thing to another. So in our last pairing, we're going to kind of bring things back full circle, and we're going to talk about two decks that I use for just kind of generic sort of clean slate palette cleansing energy, and that is the Textured Tarot with the Daily Crystal Inspiration Oracle. So this, for me, is such a fun pairing because it allows me to have a little bit of a play with that clean slate energy. So we have the central focus here with the Oracle. Again, lots of white space. You'll see that's definitely a common thread for me for that sort of palette cleanser energy. And it allows me to have that beautiful, succinct focal point. But the Textured Tarot brings in a little bit of fun, a little bit of play, a little bit of something different. Now again, it's not really layering it really heavily with any sort of additional correspondences, but it does, I think, bring a lot of beautiful energy. So it's kind of, in a sense, it's a clean slate because it just kind of steps away from everything else. But it also brings a little bit of fun because there is movement here, there is texture. Sometimes the clean slate energy can feel a little cold. It can feel a little distant. And I think that the Textured Tarot does a really good job of keeping things really sort of neutral in a sense, but it's not quite as stark. It's a little bit more, it has a little bit more heart and soul to it. So I think it's like a beautiful blend of kind of everything that we've looked at. This is one of the decks that I kind of use when I just need like that clean slate energy, that palette cleanser on just like a whole self kind of a level. I like pairing it with the crystals because, as I mentioned, with the Earth Alchemy, the crystals kind of create like a bedrock, a foundation. There's something very solid about crystal for me. And you pair that with all the beautiful plant energy that we see in the Textured Tarot. Plants and stuff feature pretty predominantly in this deck. And again, we get sort of that balance between what creates foundation and what allows room for growth and expansion and impermanence a lot of times, because palette cleanser decks and readings for me, they're not long-term things that I'm going to be diving deep into for months on end, right? These are readings to help me just either tap into specific sort of an energy, like we're, kind of getting rid of some of the clutter in the mind space, or we're kind of calming things a little bit down a little bit in the heart space. The Textured Tarot does a beautiful job of kind of combining all of those elements together and just gives me something kind of like clean and simple to have for a moment, and to allow me to make that kind of transition from one kind of state of being or one type of practice or whatever the case may be. Whenever I'm shifting energies is really what the palette cleansers are about for me. I'm shifting energy from one thing to another. And sometimes it's helpful for me to have that kind of clean slate type of an energy, that palette cleanser energy. How many times can I say those two phrases in one video? We should probably count. But sometimes it's really helpful for me to have that in order to kind of clear the energetic residue from one state of being or one type of practice, and allows me to step into another practice with, like, again, that clean slate, right? So that's kind of why I use decks like this, how I use them, why I have so many of them, enough of them to actually do a whole playing with pairs video on it. Because I do use them for different things, and I find that it's really helpful. A lot of times I'll do transition readings to specifically engage with one particular energy or another, whereas here I'm kind of looking at, I'm trying to step away from the energy a little bit. I'm trying to kind of clear the space and to just allow me to kind of sit in this energy for a moment to let me know what I need to do kind of moving forward as I move from one way of being to another, and then I can kind of start again. So again, these aren't like permanent readings. They're not long term. I just sit with them for a short time. It could be a few minutes. It could be a day or more. It could be a week or more. But they just do a wonderful job. I'm talking so much, I ran out. They just do a wonderful job of really creating that transition between one state of being and another. It's just an energetic cleansing in a sense. And I can use it in specific ways, if I'm doing particular work. So there you have it, our third, I think, installment of playing with pairs, looking at my palette cleanser decks. So the decks that I use to help me sort of transition from one energy to another, or just kind of wipe the slate clean in between different practices or things like seasonal shifts or different energetic practices. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.